Great. So yeah, so this week's project is a continuation from last week's project in terms of you are required to do a lot of thinking statistically and kind of understand the subtle points and think about what is probability and how uncertainties propagate and how you make decisions. The same as like you made decision on change points. Here you made decision about like whether a certain improvement is good or not, statistically or good or not. Usually we don't use in statistics at all good or bad. We use statistically good or bad. So which is just means it kind of quantified in the probability sense, right? So most of the time A/B testing, in which is the focus of this week's project or challenge, is a lot more focused on gradual change, improving or measuring the performance of a gradual change from a certain baseline. And that baseline usually is considered as the control group, and then the change that is proposed can be depending on the context. It could be treatment if it's medical. It is exposed in the case of the current case because we are exposing people to a certain advertisement. So that's the exposed group, or a treatment group, or basically just what you call the B or A, you know, what, I don't know which one A and B stands for, but depending on the context, it would change, right? So, and the whole idea is trying to plan what goes inside, where the A/B testing framework is dependent on how you set up your data collection and what kind of data collection. In our case, whether a person sees or not, or whether a person clicks on it or not, whether a person is injected the same thing or not, if it's a medical case. So it's about like, what is the actual treatment or the kind of the improvement you are proposing, and why do you propose that? So if it's vaccine, of course, it's very obvious. It's like you want people to not get infected. But if it is a product, for example, if it's a change on the website, a button or a color that requires, did you have actually previously a prior that this thing is not working, or that, you know, you think that this is that the cause that is, for example, if you want to achieve kind of like people clicking a certain rate, a click rate of a certain button of a certain amount, then you may propose the change on the name, you may propose the change on the color, you may propose these things, and then you have to understand why that is being proposed. Otherwise, the kind of test might not make sense. So that's called the design phase. And then you have to ensure in the process that this is actually then kind of like collected, the data is collected in such a way that you actually can answer the question. So that means answering a question means you have to understand if it's not the case. Actually, if there was another change that is actually the case because of, let's say, internet interruption, are you able to capture it? If it was, for example, because it's weekend, are you able to understand the change because of these other features, other kind of dimensions? So you have to be able to, that's called the kind of like the matrix that needs to not change within the two groups. So you have to understand the matrix that needs to not change, such that it ensures the data quality, and the matrix, of course, that's changing what you are measuring. So that's the kind of like the line of thought. But within that, and when do you expect it to make sense? When do you expect this thing, for example, to stop and to make interpretation? That depends on the algorithm. So you're getting, so from the data, from the design aspect of it, to kind of setting up a data collection and ensuring early before the experiment starts that you have all these things set up. The data collection kind of will tell you if you are in the right direction or not. And then after that, applying the right algorithm to actually say when, you know, as fast as we can, of course, as soon as we can, to try to quantify whether the improvement is making sense or not. And that's what you will spend from Wednesday on. From Wednesday on, a lot more you're thinking about the algorithm aspect, which is like, does it make sense? You know, does the result that we get make sense or not? So you will be thinking like, okay, you know, what does it mean make sense? You know, is the data enough? And it's kind of a lot more of the statistical, the modeling aspect of it. Before that is actually really overlooking the entire process and understanding the design, as well as just the data qualities and what kind of metrics do we use, where should we be careful, what kind of distributions are relevant for why do we choose these distributions, exactly like what you did last week, okay? So that's the general one. And if you have that picture clear in your head from today to Saturday, basically in your head, great. If not, the whole point of this is to ask as much as you can to try to get that whole picture, to set up like, you know, your framework, your thinking framework, such that it gets easier as you go. Okay, so that's what is the general picture, and you can ask, and all of us can answer your questions. So just now is your chance.
Yeah, I can even like giving an example in the telecommunication, like when you are selling data package, for example, for the client, and now you have your data user in the world database of client, and then your habitual data user used to be like around 1 million person, and then one day you realize that this rate is just decreasing, like falling from 1 million to 19,100,000 people, for example. And then for any reason or other reason, like you want to get them on board, you can just calling them, like refreshing them, like passing them some bonus, some like some new proposition, some new strategy, try some new strategy on those people. Then as a data scientist, you can just be asked to like study the behavior of the customer and try to select those who are just decreasing, because if the number of the data user are just decreasing, yeah, so this depend on some specific people. So those who are decreasing their usage in terms of data, you will be, for example, asked to try to understand them and select them. So if you once you select them, maybe they would say like, let's make an experiment to see like if we adopt a new strategy, like if we are giving a bonus of data, like let's say 5 megabyte or 10 megabyte to them, compared to a control group, how this is going to get them on board. Like let's see the performance of the strategy. Yeah, so now you will select your customer, and you will design the product. Team will design the offer, like, yeah, we are going to offer 20 megabyte to those people for one day, and to stimulate them, yeah, to pass it to them, to inform them by SMS, by all the canal as possible. And then let's see that after they have used the offer, the bonus, how did they do in terms of KPI, as data usage now. So you have your target group and you have your control group, and then you want to compare both in terms of performance to see that, yeah, is between the period I just give the advertisement campaign, or is like I just give the bonus, is there any difference between before and after the strategy, or is there any difference before the control group and the target group for this specific strategy? So this is a real example in telecommunication. So we used to check how many people are dormant until 7 days, until 15 days, until 1 month. So with those people, we are just passing a campaign, we are just running campaign, and this is where A/B testing becomes powerful. Yeah. So to give you a good example, yeah, that's it.
I think that's a good example case where, yeah, where you would probably have seen it over your own experience that you have been offered.
Hello.
Exactly.
Okay.
Hello.
Yeah. Elekura?
Yeah, please, Jen Hano, please, can you explain how we are going to get the control? I understand, okay, how are you going to, for the telecommunication, the example you gave, are you going to get your control users? How are you going to segment?
Yeah, like you have your whole database, and from the database you realize some are just dropping their usage of data. So those who are just not using data, lose those couple of days, let's say for example 1 week before, you just select them, because there is a data usage variables. Like, yeah, you will aggregate the data usage per customer, and you will select now all those who have not used data, who has the data usage, total data usage equal to 0 or between like 0 and 5 megabytes. So you consider this is small enough, and you return them as not data user. So once you you take that, you will sample now from this list your target list. So you know those people are not using data, and then you will take a control group. So the control group will be like, let's say, those people who are using data, they don't stop any usage of data, for example. And then you have your the two group, like a normal group who is actually using data, and a target group who is actually not using data, and you want to pass to both the campaign and then see how it performs. Yeah, so it's that.
Thank you.
So another thing I would just really say is that don't think about the general framework, like right here at the beginning of the week. Think about what is an experiment, why do I do A/B testing. Of course, multiple examples will help you, definitely. But what are, why, if you understand already, then try to look at the kind of like, which part of it I don't understand well, which part of it's kind of confusing me. And so kind of try to look at like the overall picture now, today and tomorrow, try to understand like the pieces. And then of course, look at different examples, definitely would help, like in different industries, like in telecommunication, in supermarkets, I mentioned on advertisement, you are working mostly for advertisement for the data, but it could be for website optimization, many other things. So try to, like, sometimes it's about really looking at where is the statistics? Why am I now a data scientist trying to do this? And kind of trying to look at the different pieces, like exactly like the kind of the sub-objectives are, the first part is really understanding the kind of the concept, the bigger pictures, and then zooming into the data and analysis, and exactly like the modeling part, how then the data is generated. So you need always to understand the data generation model, which basically relates to what kind of statistical process is happening. So in your head, try to grasp the whole thing at once, and then piece by piece, break them apart, and piece by piece, try to understand them. Usually that gives, if that's the kind of brain you have, it gives you a context. And whenever you work, you move from one step to another, it gets easier. So just your questions, you can structure them that way as well. So Jean, for you, there is a question. Like, do you answer already?
Yeah, so like, yeah, you can just, it depends on what your objective. Like, if you want to see how a group of person is like, you want to quantify the behavior of a group of person, then the recommendation is to sample some people from this group and some people from the normal group. Yeah, but if you want, for example, to look for the power of two different advert campaign, then you can sample from the same like the same population, but let's say using two different campaign, then you get the different points, like the change points. Yeah, so it's just depend on the objective. Yeah.
So I will ask you a question, and you guys, anyone wants to answer, and or write it down. So let's say you have your own website, okay, and it got so much attractive that many people start coming in, and then you converted it into a startup. So you are now providing, I don't know, local information, blah blah, right? Now there are some buttons you want to change. So how would that be useful, and what would be the process you would follow? So it's kind of why, you can of course ask a designer, a friend of yours who's a designer, and kind of tells you like, oh, like, look, you know, if you look at this kind of designs that are great. And so why, you know, what would be the advantage there to use, let's say, A/B testing instead of just doing other things like, you know, hiring someone who's great in kind of design or stuff? Like, what would be the difference? What is the difference between these two approaches?
Can you go over the question?
So you have a website, you may be either hired in a company, or you have your own company which has a website, and you want to change something, like because of, let's assume you have a very good valid reason. It's kind of, you want them to click something such that when they click that, you get money. Let's say it's a YouTube thing, you know, it's like if people see it, then you get money. So you want to increase that one. And so that is a button, let's call it a button. And you know, that button, you can ask a designer to design it nice buttons, or you can do some kind of your own A/B testing. So now I ask you to connect them. They may be connected. These two things are connected, but if they are connected, how are they connected? And in which ways, why would you choose one over the other? Is that clear?
Yeah.
Yeah, Kelly, go on.
So I think I'd go with the A/B testing because there's this thing I learned a while back, that sometimes you might think this is the best design, but then people don't really like it because people are different. So that's why I'd rather go with the A/B testing, because as much as the designer might have a good design, it might not be what the people want or what they're attracted to. So, yeah.
Okay, so right while you are there, so what would you change next then? What would be your, like, you know, how would you do the A/B testing? Like, just not the whole process, but, you know, when in A/B testing, you need a variation. So what would be your variation in that case? Where would you get that information of variation?
I think I would, if I have the resources to look at what has been done by other companies, I'd like to do that as well, and to see how the product is being perceived, like how many clicks they're getting, the click rate for different stuff.
Okay, great. Okay, so Jayola.
So, good morning, everyone. So, probably if I'll get a designer first and try and say the designer should make.
Okay, so what can you repeat?
Particular template of that same page. Then I would open the users page to a particular user, and the other set of my users, I would open them to the new one the designer has actually designed. So I will use A/B testing to actually check which one had much conversion rate. So that's my way of applying the A/B testing.
Okay. So I think those are good, but I'm going to give again other examples so that you try the same way, right? So now let's take at a supermarket, okay? And then there is a milk company that you are working on, and they kind of have a milk, you know, you go to the supermarket and then there are a lot of milk products, right? And then the sale amount, this is a new milk product, and the sale amount kind of like smaller, or they expect to get somewhere, like they have a 1-year plan, right, where to get. So it's kind of, they need to keep updating that. And so one of the point is about kind of package, right? So whether it's like, it should have this opening, this type of opening versus that type of opening, right? And now your task is like, okay, you need to determine and you need to collect data, like for, you know, these two variations. That variation comes because, you know, by looking at other milk products, there are a few types of opening, how you open the milk, basically. And so they wanted to try which one to adopt. So now do the same thing. How would you set up the collection? You know, what would be your testing? Would would you use A/B testing or not? So that's also like a point. So you may not use A/B testing in this case, or you may use, but if so, why? Just go and reflect. Okay, Emmanuel?
Okay. I'd want to use an example here in this case. Like, I think the first thing we need to understand is what are the results we're expecting from the A/B test. What are the metrics we want to increase, or like how can we decide what is working or what is not working? That is the first thing first. So, for example, in Netflix now, maybe you want to check. I want to use Netflix as an example now.
But can you please use the milk product, just for the sake of making sure that we are on the same page?
Okay, the milk products now. Okay, for example, if in the milk product, maybe you want to test how easily or how much, like which of them they prefer in the two cases. We used, for example, give you can use A/B testing too, and using A/B testing here would like it would be a survey possibly we'll send out here, like how do they prefer, which of them do they prefer, when like the ones that use like maybe their satisfaction level and how they come back again for our milk.
So how would you collect the data? How would you collect the data?
I will like if I'm collecting data here, it will be through sending out survey possibly to the people that for the different control and the people that use the milk change different milkers and the people that used it.
Anyone else?
Yes, can I get the question again?
Sorry, you didn't get the question, Elukora?
Yes.
Okay, so Wamuyu, if you understand it, can you also explain the question and then go into answering?
Okay, so the way I've understood the question is they're trying to, okay, it's a company that's, okay, or maybe looking for if the way to open the milk cartons or the milk packets is affecting the purchasing. Have I got that correct? All right, so I think the way of an approach to collecting the data is I would actually use, given the example of the supermarket, is the inventory movement of the milk. Like I'd look at how the different, because if assuming I use a point of sale, then maybe there's records of how each particular type of milk product, each particular type of milk packaging product is moving. As for the control group, probably want to use like the packet milk, and then now depending on how many different styles of packaging of milk existing depending on the particular company wants to look at, now each of them would make a different variation for a different A/B test. That's my take.
Great. Anyone else? So also just mention about what are the complications, like where do you see the problem? Great, okay. Emmanuel, do you want to expand on your...
Okay, it's like I just understood the question now. Like I did not get the question very clearly the last time. So A/B testing here, I'll also use different stores. Like I don't want some people to know that this new service exists. Like I don't want it to be that it's because they see that new service, like they have problem with choosing or not. Then people like they see the new service and maybe for a long time it will be I'll use collecting data will take a little bit long to know how they are reacting, whether there are more people going for the new one or there are more people that like whether our service, the use of our milk reduced or it's increased when we change. Like for the people that are going to have the new type of milk in a new store entirely, that's just it. Then we have the normal people too. So we understand whether it's the time that caused or it's particularly because of the milk carton that changed the number of people buying.
So what I want, like, from this kind of challenge or kind of like reflection, is that I want you to go and kind of see the different elements. So there is the design, that you're designing something, and the design needs to understand what you need to improve, right? And then there is the data collection process, like, and that needs to be kind of reflected, and it has to solve a certain problems. And so you have to mention what are kind of problems you would encounter. So for example, are milk products every day the same? Are this or that? So it's kind of like, it's kind of, I want you to go through this kind of, okay, how do you really go, do you see it? You don't have to really invent any of the algorithm or whatever, more like, what are the problems you see? You're just testing. Now you're about to test, and you're going to reflect, you're going to design. So as a kind of statistically inclined person, where do you expect it to be a lot of problems? Like you have to debate. This is kind of brainstorming session. So if like it is about now just assuming someone told you, like depending on how the milk is kind of, you open it, there is some kind of correlation between what people buy and the kind of the what do you call it? The opener, the kind of the design element of that opening, like how you open the milk. So you are kind of trying to test that with a goal of increasing, of course, your sale. So now you have to kind of reflect in a way, like where will be the problems in that kind of, what are the things you should be careful at?
So can I try?
Go on, Adil.
So for me, if I will do this, I will constrain. Let's say I'll use different packaging, but for the same product. It must like two different packaging of the same product. The milk, it must come from the same company with the same brand and everything. The only difference being the packaging. Then I'll make sure that the people who are buying them can see both of them. I have all of them available, and I'll see which one goes through first. Then possibly I'll do this over time, and I'll see which one goes. But when people come, which one do they prefer mostly? And that's going to be how I'm going to collect my data, and then possibly can analyze. Another way I'll think about it will be to limit it to maybe certain buyers who frequent my shop. Okay, so I know that these people are always coming. Then I divide them and say, okay, among these people, which one do they prefer most? Then I can test the two different packaging.
A great point. I think you just came now to a point where earlier Ja was talking, the kind of user to whom you are testing, and you kind of are user segmenting. And I want someone else to kind of come up and expand that. Why do you do that? Why is that useful? What is Jayola? What is the question?
It's not a question, but
is that for Emmanuel?
Yeah, for Emmanuel. Yeah, he made an example of getting data from another store. So I said, can he actually get data from a competitor and a store that is actually not an employer of that store? He might not be able to. So I was trying to understand his illustration. So he now replied with false positive. So I was saying, what's false positive?
So false positive, like, do you want to explain, Emmanuel, or? Okay, yeah, Wamuyu, just go on and then we can get to that one.
Okay, so what I've understood so far is for the testing you need like people, a group of users who haven't had anything done on them, like who are operating normally, from which now the test, now the variance, the variation of what the measure that you take now is a different. So now in the example that we've been given the example that Jean gave, the users who were still using data were now like that are now the ones that were not using data in that example were now the ones who were making the validation of making an offer for free data would make a change in their behavior, being a change that particular now as compared to the other now the business which was initially using that. I think.
I couldn't hear because of it was slightly breaking.
Maybe she can also come again, like
yeah, but
summarize it.
if you understand, yeah. So maybe what is if you repeat it, maybe it might get clearer when we.
All right. Am I audible now?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay. So I was saying the need for the user segmentation is so that you can see if the change that you want to implement actually has an impact. Like in the example Jean gave, there was the users who are not using data and there were the users who are still using data. So the variation that was put in place is now the offer or the offer for free data. Now with that variation we can test against now the people who are not using data and compare them to the people who are originally using data. Yeah, I think.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, great. I think this is another element where within a real constraint, what you have is that, for example, Jacques' case is probably he's talking about a telecommunication with bigger users, right? But at the same time, the improvement you need sometimes is quite small, and that's where it comes the sample size. The more you kind of segment a user, the more you start getting smaller sample, right? If you are targeting a larger sample, you will get more data. So there's also a trade-off between how much. Of course, it gets cleaner and cleaner the more you are like testing it smaller and smaller sample, because then the variation, you remove many other variations. But the problem is that the more you segment, also the less data you have. The less data you have, the less statistical power or the statistical significance goes down, right? So that's where it really gets tricky, and that's where really almost always is the challenge is, you want to target as much as possible, but at the same time you want to exclude people which kind of becomes noise in the data. So who can try to attempt this thing from the statistical perspective? Like, what is, in this case, for example, what is the data generation? Like, so what is the data and what is the kind of the data, like what kind of statistics are we talking about? Is it a Poisson process? Is it, binomial kind of a Bernoulli process? Or is it something, a continuous process? And how is that related to, what you are trying to address? So it's probably not clear. That's, you can just have to come and then say it's not clear and, ask questions. So in the case of, okay, so let me take the milk part and let's just focus, because you have already been using also you have done some telecommunication. Let's take Jean's case, okay? Now you have you want to increase, you want to test exactly, maybe Jean, just make it small, like a project, a tiny project you want to do as a manager of some telecommunication department. What you just said earlier, but make it more like, set a target, a business objective.
Oh, okay. So like the business objectives is like just improve the revenue KPI, for example. And because we know that the revenue KPI will depends on the usage. So the usage there are a lot of usage. So data usage, for example.
Yeah,
so we want to
exactly. So data usage, revenue, okay.
Yeah, exactly. So we want to improve the data revenue. Yeah. So now let's say like we want to design the experiment, think about a strategy to actually generate the data to test if the new strategy will like decrease the number of dormant people on the data session. Is it that? Yeah, so like
Let's go on.
okay, so we want to think about a new strategy who will help us decrease the number of data user, like the dormant people using actually the data. So this is why I think that the things that the
So,
action.
but can you put it a business objective just so that other people can design this thing? Just I want more
Okay.
like you say a business objective such that
Okay.
they then go and design and reflect.
Okay. Let me. I'm writing in the chatting.
Okay. So let's take the data part, the data usage, and what would be the kind of the business objective to do hypothesis testing or A/B testing with the aim of improving the revenue.
Okay. The business objective. So like you. Okay. Assess the performance of the campaign. In the data and the data revenue KPI. So like two hypotheses. One, it is gonna decrease. It's gonna, let's say, increase. Yeah, data usage. Or two, the data usage will not be improved.
So,
Okay.
so the treatment is that if you give a bonus, right? If you give
Yes,
like
the
5 megabyte versus
exactly.
20 megabyte, let's make it. Like if you give,
so the treatment means like giving 100 megabyte data volume to 7 day dormant, 7-day data dormant. So giving 100 megabyte data volume to 7-day data dormant group.
okay,
like,
and then 100 megabyte per day, or per what is the constraint?
What the constraint is term of like what?
So 100 megabyte per day, is that, or is it 100 megabyte per month, or is it 100 megabyte per week?
Like the time duration for
like I mean, what would be the kind of what is
I
the
didn't.
So whenever you introduce a treatment, you are clarity, like it's a gradual one. So what is, you said 100 megabyte data over which period?
Okay, like 100 megabyte data for, let's say, 2 days, like.
Okay, so 48 hours, and that means you want to measure. So now the time range you want to measure is
exactly. So the time range I want to measure is 1 week
after.
1 week. 1 week after.
Okay. Is that clear? So you have now a business objective. You have your first group, the group that you are selecting. So the kind of from which we call it a population. Within that population, we segment a all users that has been dormant over the last 7 days.
Exactly.
Kind of selected. So those people who, and also when we say dormant, we have to define a threshold, right? So that threshold could be that users who used over the last 7 days of a data byte of less than, let's say, 100 megabytes. Okay.
Exactly.
So let's define that, and then all those users. Let's imagine that the number of users there are 5 megabytes. It could be. And then let's imagine you have a number, right?
Okay.
Now you start from that, and now this is for you. So the company is willing to give 100 megabytes for 48 hours, and the budget for that test you are given is so it's kind of an equivalent of something like let's say 100 gigabyte. So kind of equals to maybe 10 and then 10 times 100,
like
1000. So that's like, let's call it, they want to give
user,
1 terabyte.
so like 1,000 users. So let's say this times.
Okay, so I think let's stop there. Let's stop there.
Yeah.
And let's ask. I'm asking. So now your first task is to ask the company how much it will cost to get a reasonable answer on the business objective, and how would you go about it? If it's not clear, answer. I'm going to mute you, Elakura, just because it feels there are sometimes a noise. Okay. So how would you go and ask the company how much it will cost them to do this test?
Hello. Hello.
Yeah.
Okay. Are we giving the 1,000 users? Is it divided between?
I think forget that one. Can you? I mean, delete. Assume that Ja didn't write 100 users. Whatever. Forget that. So all the point up to that so far is that, and then you have to your first point is that you have to give the company. You have to ask the company how much it will cost them to get a reasonable answer, statistically good answer, valid answer on that. And you have to request the value. Janet, what didn't you get? Can you make it clear?
Hello, can I try?
Yeah.
I thought Janet didn't get something, like the question or something. So I thought I was giving, but okay, anyone can try. So go on.
Okay, so basically the objective.
Can you repeat the objective? If you get it, if you understand the question, can you answer the objective of the case? Because Janet didn't get the objective of the case. So
okay,
start from there.
Let's assume we are working for a telecommunication industry, and we want to know if increasing or giving data to dormant users, that is users that have not used up to 5 MB in the last 1 week, we increase their loyalty, like make them come back to using data. And that means we're going to divide them into 2 groups. The control are those that have been using more than 5 MB. The SPR, the control will be those that have used more than 5 MB, and the people that we are testing on are those that have used less than 5 MB. So we want to know if we give them 100 MB, will there be an increase in data usage for those that are dormant, those that have used less than 5 MB, and those, or will there be an increase or there will be a decrease? So that, or will the data usage remain the same? Will they still continue their dormant stage of using less than 5 MB? I think that's a question objective, right? Hello?
Yes.
Okay. So basically, first of all, we have already gotten our control group and our experiment group. So now we are going to run the experiment for a few days, and then give these people 100 MB, and then the control group, we are going to give them 100 MB too. So after a week,
Before going in detail, can you answer how much it will cost the company to get to? Well, how would you go into it?
Okay, so basically now, we will know, I would like to sample people from the control group. Let's say if there are 50, we'll multiply that 50 times the numbers of MB that we're giving these people, and then quantify it in terms of the money we are using. If it's in Nigeria, we use Naira. If it's outside Nigeria, we use NGN.
But I'm saying, why do you choose 50? Is that gonna give you? How do you get that number?
Okay, basically, I think I can use sampling from people from those control group. First of all, we are going to aggregate the users by the data they have used. So from there, if we have about 1,000 users, we can't give up to 1,000. As statisticians, we can just take a sample, let's say 100 or 200 from that 1,000 people that are dormant.
I would say that is exactly what you're not going to do. So anyone else? And I want you to defend why you are choosing the number. All that matters sometimes is exactly that one number you just assume you will get. So try to just say, like, he says 50, 100, 200, but I would say that's exactly the wrong way to go. So, and why, like, you know, okay, go on, Adnan, if you wanna, I think that's.
Hello.
Hello.
So I don't really remember well, but I think there is a statistical
don't worry about that. Just idea.
Okay, so there's a statistical technique in which you can use to determine the optimal sample size from a population. So you can use that to determine the optimal sample size from the total number of users we have. Then from that since we are assigning 100 megabytes to each user, we can estimate how much that will cost the company.
Okay, that's great. That's a good start. That's, I would say, for the question I'm asking, that is 40% of the solution. So who's going to add and contribute and make it 100? I mean, you can add 20% and stuff like that until it gets full answer. But add on top of what Adnan says, for example, what else, you know, what else do you know? So his main point, which is valid, is that you need to determine the optimal sample size. And what other element do you need in that before applying that algorithm, whatever that is there? What else it depends on? So optimal sample size is one, but what are the other parameters that are required to do that? This is called live thinking, right? So just try to bring your past knowledge, your current knowledge, and whatever, try to piece together, because that way you can understand easily the weekly challenge. So that's why we are doing.
Can I try?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can just know the distribution of the data, so we know the mean and the standard deviation.
That's. But in this case, I think that will come later. But in our case, at the moment, is we're trying to determine how much it costs. So there is an optimal sample size, but that optimal size depends on something too. So it's kind of, it needs to understand why, to get the optimal sample size, the optimal sample size depends on something, another critical element.
Can I try? So can I try?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, I think since we are dealing with people here, first of all, we aggregate them by those that are not using, that are dormant. Then I think we can use their population or something like that and get the optimal sample size. I think that is what I have
Who else? I think just get everyone. Just I know that you may not. This is you may have not done it, but just try to kind of what do you think do you need to get an optimal sample size? Because it was I mean the answer is there, but just it needs a critical element to get that.
Are we setting a threshold?
No, for what kind of threshold? Like I mean that's a good point. I think the name is really similar to threshold, but what kind of threshold?
I don't know.
So in which part are you putting some kind of threshold? I think that's a good point. Like the name is the same, but on what? The cost of tuning the data collection process, that is very good as well.
Okay.
You can, that is called.
Yeah, can I try?
Okay, yes, just let me explain what Latome said. I think that's a good point as well.
Okay.
That is kind of limits it from the upper, so it kind of sets the upper limit. That's good, but it doesn't give the answer, but it's good point. It cuts the upper, or it sets the upper limit. Go on, Elvis.
So I can say that in getting the sample size, we can say that we see the users who have used below let's say 10 megabytes in the last 1 week, and after getting the sample size, now we can calculate the data, the bonus data we want to give them, and we get the cost that it will cost the company.
But what is that sample size? We haven't exactly, we are there determining the sample size.
The users who have used below 10 MB in the last 1
Let's say
week.
they are 100,000. Do you give each of them 100 megabyte? It's fine, but you probably, the company doesn't accept that. So you need to give them what is the minimum cost you need to sample, to do this experiment.
Hello. Yeah. Can I talk?
Yeah.
I think we need to look at the maximum numbers of data that the users have used, and then look at the minimum. So with that, we can estimate and look for and strike a balance. If, let's say, for instance, the maximum MB that users have used in our database is 100, and then the minimum is 5 MB. So with that, I think we can now know where we are going to start. Maybe we are going to start from 10 MB. If you have about 1,000 users that have used less than 5 MB, we can't give out to that 1,000. So we need to look at the maximum numbers of people that have used MB, like the data that they have used. If it's 100, then the minimum is 5. Then we can just do some statistical stuff and then look at the optimum level that we can use to set our threshold. I think that is what
I think you are in that good direction. So just for the time aspect, I would just go on and say, like, it's very good. So the first one, so what Latome said, just putting the data, like the cost of the running data collection, using, if you only want to do that, then you have to change your final algorithm. Let's say you have to use something called sequential testing. But where is that 10%? Where do you get that 10%? So, right. So, I mean, Ayabela said 10% of the population, but where do you get that number? Like in this kind of test, each number has to have a reason, right? A statistical reason. So using the kind of allocating a maximum budget, then you can do some kind of called another, what you also have to, you are going to reach is the sequential testing algorithm. If you are doing sequential testing, you don't need to identify the number, like, how many you are going to run. You just run it. By then, if it succeeds, if not, whatever. So that's one strategy. But the other one that really depends for A/B testing would be how much change you are expecting. So the company wants to have a lift on the revenue, right? So they are getting a revenue, let's say, of $100 or $100,000, and then they want to improve that by a certain amount. And that change, the percentage they want to improve, is what you need to know as a data scientist. So such that if it is a small amount, if they want a 1% change on that, then you need a huge volume of data. So you kind of have to depend on that. So one parameter that goes into optimal sampling is this: how much are you expecting to improve? If it is a small improvement you want to detect, then you need a larger sample. If you are trying to detect only, a bigger sample, a bigger jump, let's say from 100,000 to 1 million, then you don't need that many samples, because you can only just detect it. If it's that detectable, you can only detect it from a small sample. So the sample size you choose depends on how much you are expecting to improve. Okay, so I think because we don't have time, and then the next step is to get these values. You get now the optimal sample, and then the next stage is how do you then collect the data? So we haven't talked about it, but I think just like you can think about it. Okay, so now you kind of determine what you need, what kind of, what you will ask the business person. This case, Ja, I would just go and Ja as a director, I will just go and ask him, what is, how much money do you want to change? Like, what is the expected improvement you expect? And then he would, this is a business question, so he would answer. It's not a data science question. And then I will take that value. So in this case, Ja, how much, let's say, from 100,000, how much do you want to improve?
Yeah, so let's say $2,000.
200, okay, so 200,000. So like you want to improve 100%. Basically relatively whatever. So then that would be an easier for me as a data scientist. I can detect that by just a smaller sample. And then exactly what I think Ayabella said, or I don't know who said, then I will get just the kind of like the maximum sample size. Like the kind of, I will go and find the one that would, I think it's Adnan. So I will just go and then get that algorithm that, given some conditions, it will give me the sample size. Okay, and then the next stage as a data scientist, now I have all the business cases. I'm just going to compute how I'm going to set up the thing. Am I going to divide them? Am I going to control this parameter or that parameter? So I will start then doing. So this is just the very first part, and then it will continue. So just think of it that way. First, you have to determine all that before, and then you have to then go and define about how you're going to set up, how you're going to collect the data, and how you're going to make sure the data is valid. And then you then apply and kind of do the analysis. So that's going to be exactly what you're going to follow this week as well. So with that, I think we can finish this tutorial because we're way over time. But any question, we're going to have on Slack. But Ja, just go on if you want to have anything. I have to quit now. I have to run. But you can just conclude it and then stop the record. I will leave now.
Yeah, I think we can just like continue on Slack because I'm available now. So if you are asking question, then I have more idea what kind of answer I can give you on Slack. I think is better. Yeah.
So Ilakura said, can you clarify Abella's question? Which question? So for a small change, I need large sample, and for large change, I need small data. Yes, that's exactly the point. So almost always when you are trying to measure smaller change, then you need a huge data. If you are trying to detect a bigger change, you only need a smaller data. And if you don't understand it, then let's take that one into Slack and let's discuss it. But it's almost always in statistics, the smaller you want a sample, that means it's called resolution, the resolution of the thing. If you want to have a high resolution, you need more data. If you need if you are only okay with a small resolution, which means big change only, then you don't need that many data. So, but you can take this question to the Slack and then we can discuss because that's important.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. Thank you.